Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to GEEXX Reads. Today I want to talk about a book called The Misenchanted Sword by Lawrence Watt Evans, an image of which you will see here. The Misenchanted Sword, there will be spoilers for basically the first act. I'm going to outline the first act. The nations of Ishtar and the Northern Empire have been at war for a very long time. Valdar is a scout for the Ishtar. He's trapped behind enemy lines. Has been for several days. Wandering around a swamp, he encounters an old hermit's hut. Inadvertently leads the enemy to his hut, which a northern sorcerer winds up blowing up. The old hermit is basically a wizard who manages to hide them while the patrol wanders off. And basically, just to get Valdar out of his hair, he basically puts some enchantments on his sword. Any enchantment he can basically think of with all his supplies blown up. So whatever enchantments he can toss on Valdar's sword, he does, and then, leaves. Valdar, on his trip back to civilization, finds that there are some odd enchantments. When he draws it to test it, to see if there's anything different about it, he can't put it back in its sheath. It basically is stuck to his hand. When he does finally encounter another scout, the sword kills the scout on its own, and then he can put it back in the sheath. Until he draws it again, and he can't put it back in the sheath. So he eventually makes his way back to his unit, lets the wizards in the army examine the sword, and they discover there's some odd that whoever put the enchantments on the sword was nuts, because there's some screwy things about it. The sword will kill any one person. You draw the sword, it will kill the first person you fight with, and then it's useless until you sheath it and draw it again. The sword has a spell of true ownership, which means he can't get rid of it. He can't even throw it away. The sword will find a way back to him. 3, the sword won't let him die. It doesn't give him any superhuman powers. It won't protect him from being injured. The sword just will not let him die no matter what happens to him. It will just keep him alive, regardless of how much damage he takes or how old he gets. The sword won't let him die. Until there's apparently a limit on how many people the sword will kill. Once it has exhausted that limit, the sword will turn on him and kill him. The sword isn't much use in combat. You can't draw and sheath your sword in the middle of combat. It basically turns him into a one-man assassin. It basically turns him into an assassin. That's all he can do is kill one person at a time. So the army basically trains him to be an assassin. He's not unstoppable. Like I said, he can be injured, he can be restrained, and the sword won't do anything but kill one person. It won't do anything else. It's not magically sharp or anything. It won't cut through steel or stone. That is basically Act 1 and maybe partway through it, Act 2 a little bit. That's the basic premise of the story. And I found it's a fun, light read. I wouldn't say there's a lot of character development. Valdar doesn't really change throughout the course of the story. Not much, anyway. It's just a story of how he deals with the situation. I think he's a believable character. He's not like supremely noble or supremely brave or even supremely skilled. He's just an ordinary soldier, an ordinary scout who's kind of stuck with the circumstances. And he deals with it as best he can. There's also an interesting bit of world building here too. the Estharians use wizardry, and the Northern Empire uses sorcery. There's also witchcraft involved, but neither side uses that. There's multiple levels of multiple magic systems. I think he's done a decent job of world building. I don't know too much about the world other than what I've explained. A little bit more than that, but not too much. You know, magic is fairly common. Valdor was given like a stone to carry with him while he was scouting. It basically, he never got hungry or thirsty while he carried it. So like a sustenance spell. So there's little bits of magic. It's fairly common. I mean, he knew a few bit, you know, he was taught some very, very simple basic spells he could use as a scout, but he's not obviously a wizard. It's just little stuff that you can basically teach anyone to do. So magic is fairly common, fairly mundane, actually. It's part of the day-to-day life. It's not like this mystical art that only a few people can do, like you would see in Dungeons and Dragons or things like that. It's just, you know, magic is almost like science or any technology, really. It's just part of the world and people use it. The story, like, his story isn't that deep. This isn't like the best story I've ever read, but it is a good story. It's decently told. It's interesting. It's a solid B+. I don't have any other books by this author, by Lawrence Watt Evans. I have found out this is the first book in a series, but the books aren't connected. They're all standalone stories that have nothing to do with one another. So if you have, you know, if you see other books by this author in this series, you know, you don't have to worry about reading anything else or reading this first. I haven't read this book in years. I really, really enjoyed, you know, pawing through this again to try and, you know, when I dug this out of my collection, it's like, this is a fun story. I remember bits about this. I remember basically the stuff that I've outlined for you. I remember that. I remember some bits in the middle bit fairly well, and I remember the ending fairly well. There's some little bits, you know, like middle of Act 2 and Act 3 that I didn't remember well, but until, you know, opening up the book and like I said, pawing through it. But it is a solid, decently well told, fun story. Nothing to write home about, but it's something that was written well enough that I remembered it, you know, all this time later, that it's like, oh yeah, I could give a brief outline on this book. I could give a brief outline on this book without even opening it up again, even though I did, just for fun. So well enough that it stuck with me all these years. So I would recommend it if you can find it. I did learn when researching this book that the publishing company that manages his books basically shut down. I don't know if it shut down or not, but it basically stopped publishing his books. He did work on self-publishing some of them. I'm not sure how easy they will be to find because of the company's decision to not publish his books anymore. I don't know. I think it's because I don't know why. It was a smaller publishing company, so I think it might have had something to do with the fact that more people are doing audiobooks or digital books than physical copies, like old farts like me. But if you can find it, also I have to mention the book has several different art covers. Who does? One of the things that made me want to buy this book is that I like the artist. I like the artist who does the artwork on this particular cover. And I have to admit, cover art does influence my decision to buy books. So I've always liked that particular artist. Excuse me. Yeah. As always, thanks for watching. As always, my stuff is crap. And until next time, good hunting.